So my name is Olivia Nicolarsen, and I am the Forestry Outreach Coordinator with Maine Woodland Owners in a partnership position with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Maine Woodland Owners is a member-supported organization that provides education, advocacy, and outreach for woodland owners in the state of Maine. And then we also have with us Sean Horan, who is he's similar position with UMaine Cooperative Extension at NRCS as our Climate Smart Ag and Forestry Professional. And so today we are here to discuss the basics of the NRCS programs, including how to apply, what types of assistance are available, and the steps to getting started. So whether you're a new landowner or looking to expand your conservation efforts, or a forester who's just looking for more information about some of these programs, we're going to kind of go over a little bit of all of them, if that kind of makes sense, to kind of help provide you with the essential knowledge to help you navigate the process and assess the support that you will be needing. Like I mentioned before, this is being recorded. We've saved time for questions at the end, but feel free to drop them in the chat so we don't forget them. And we will go ahead and get started here. Sean, I don't know if while I'm getting this shared, you want to introduce yourself or share a little bit about yourself?
Sure, why not? Sean Horan, thanks for the introduction. I'm the Climate Smart Ag and Forestry Professional with Cooperative Extension NRCS. I've been in this role almost 2 years at this point, doing outreach and education, things like this, and working with NRCS field offices. So I've had a fair amount of experience working with a lot of the NRCS field offices and seeing how they go about incorporating these NRCS practices, both through EQIP and CSP. So once Olivia's done, then I'll be talking more about Climate Smart and what that looks like at NRCS, what that means, and how that relates to the forestry practices that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I see in the chat already. Interest in PCT and I'm sure other things like crop tree release and stuff like that. So, but yeah, keep it short and sweet and let you get the ball rolling, Olivia.
Perfect. If this will work. Let's see if it'll work. It was working. Give us just 1 second. There we go. Perfect. Can you guys all still see the screen? Hello?
Nope, we can't see the screen, the shared screen.
Yep, no screen.
Yeah.
I like to start a presentation with technical difficulties, so just an FYI. Okay, let's start not in the presentation mode. Maybe that'll work for us.
Now we see the regular presentation, not the in presentation mode.
How about now? Yeah?
Oh, there you go.
Perfect.
There's a bit of a lag. Okay, you're set.
Is it still just the NRCS screen?
It is.
Okay.
And just press enter to.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, sorry about that, but we like to keep it interesting. So the goal of the NRCS is to provide our farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners the tools and assistance to conserve and maintain and restore natural resources that we essentially have a responsibility to, right? So there's different types of assistance that the NRCS can offer. So there's technical assistance, and the technical assistance is aiming to kind of help identify the issues and possible solutions for conservation items that you think may be present on a property. So this technical assistance is about providing that kind of expert advice and plans and the tools to help landowners improve and protect their land in ways that they didn't necessarily think that they could have done before, if that kind of makes sense. And so the goal is to kind of help promote environmentally sustainable landscapes and giving people the tools and education they need to do that themselves. And so there's a variety of technical assistance that is available to farmers, ranchers, and landowners to help manage and improve that land. You can get some planning and advice So there's always experts to help create plans to improve the health of the land, including guidance on soil, water, air, plants, and wildlife. And then you can also have soil management assistance, so you can develop strategies for improving soil health, preventing erosion, increasing productivity if you happen to be having some sort of ag development on your land as well. There's water management, so you can get help with managing your water resources, like building efficient irrigation systems, or improving just the water quality on your property, or managing wetlands, because no one land plot is exactly the same throughout the entire acreage, right? Wildlife habitat, everybody loves to see wildlife. Everybody likes to look at birds, hunt deer, and things like that. So you can get advice and technical assistance on how to create or improve habitats on your property for wildlife, including planting native plants or protecting existing natural areas. Grazing and livestock is also an option, but I'm gonna skip over that, assuming most people here are not here for grazing and livestock. Erosion control, which can be a really big one, especially considering the amount of water bodies that's in Maine, right? You might have a stream that's coming through your property, but then feeds into a lake that's 5 miles down the way, right? Nobody wants to be the person who had a bunch of soil accidentally dump into the river and then dump into the lake. So you can also get advice on how to deal with that, like planting some cover crops or a buffer zone or erosion barriers, building terraces. You can also get help with nutrient and pest management, so efficient use of fertilizers or pesticides in a way that helps reduce the environmental impact of using those things, as well as resource monitoring. So that could be included as well. So this technical assistance is at no cost to producers or landowners, essentially using that term interchangeably. So if a landowner or a producer chooses to take the next steps in improving an operation after getting some sort of technical assistance, you can work with the NRCS to develop a conservation plan, which is specific to that landowner and to that property. And so that conservation plan is going to come with some suggested conservation practices that can help reach goals and objectives in regard to conservation on the property. And that's kind of where the financial assistance comes in. So this plan is going to include tools and resources customized specifically for each individual, right? Like a land use map, there's going to be soil information, photos, inventory of resources, economic costs and benefits, and then even like a schedule of recommended practices, maintenance, all of the things. Oops, we got one more person in the waiting room. And so this plan is going to be kind of a step-by-step format. And again, it's going to be unique to each customer's or landowner's individual goals and needs based off of the conservation concerns. And so you can apply for this financial assistance to ease some of the cost of installing conservational practices that are outlined in those plans. And this financial assistance is through cost share programs, incentives, and grants to support landowners in improving those resources outlined in the plans. Looks like there might be another lag going on. If it freezes up, just let me know and I'll try and get it to kind of work, maybe. Not technically IT, but we'll see. So I had mentioned these financial assistance programs through the NRCS, and the two main ones are going to be EQIP and CSP. So EQIP is Environmental Quality and Incentives Program, and then CSP is Conservation Stewardship Program. So these two programs are really, really similar, but they're also different. It's kind of like squares and rectangles. Every square is a rectangle, not every rectangle is a square, right? So EQIP is kind of like the beginning stages or new to conservation or like step one, essentially. And CSP is tailored more towards those who have been implementing conservation practices for a longer amount of time and want to improve upon those while also maybe adding another conservation practice to address another issue. These differences, you can kind of see them reflected on the graphic here. But there's a difference in duration, eligible practices, and the program goals. So you can see the EQIP contracts, they're typically going to be shorter term. So they're going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So for example, you might be implementing some sort of like tree stand improvement, and that will be outlined in the plan as either being 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It just kind of depends. And CSP programs are intended, like I mentioned, to enhance already existing conservation practices. So let's say you have done a couple of EQIP contracts already and you've been doing conservation on your land for 1 to 3 years. You might sign up for a CSP program, which essentially is rewarding you for doing conservation while adopting another activity, kind of. But these contracts are longer because they're assuming that you're going to maintain those conservation efforts. So CSP contracts are anywhere from 5 to 10 years, which again can depend on the type of practices that are involved in it. So CSP is really great for like whole farm and whole landscape approaches, whereas EQIP might only address like certain areas or small issues on a landscape. And so there's also more choices for CSP in regard to like available practices and enhancements. And Sean will talk about a little bit later. There's also some bundle options, which are pretty neat. Another important distinction between these two is the payment schedules. So EQIP is one flat rate payment received once a practice has been implemented to NRCS standards and it's been signed off on. There is an option for new beginning landowners, farmers, ranchers, and underserved individuals to have part of an approved contract payment advanced to help kind of initiate those practices. But CSP does not have that. CSP is one annual payment for the whole year, and there's no advancement for that payment. So you get that once a year for the length of the contract. And then that's it. You can't get it early. You may get it late, but I can't speak to that part. So like, for example, you might get a flat rate payment of $2,400 to hire a TSP to do a forest management plan. Once that forest management plan has been written up and approved, you get a payment and then you can pay your TSP. And then that's it. It's done. Whereas CSP, an example for that would potentially be someone who's been doing some tree stand improvement in their woods. Their habitat has greatly improved. They've signed up for CSP and now they also want to add in some bat boxes on their property. They're going to get a payment every year for including bat boxes on their property, if that kind of makes sense. So CSP is essentially getting a payment for continuing to do great conservation work, whereas EQIP is the first step in conservation work. So you can also see Act Now is a program that is designated to kind of help accelerate some of these applications for different programs. So forest management plans are one of those. You can apply for a forest management plan. And I believe, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the goal is to have someone, if someone comes in and applies for a forest management plan within 3 months, they want to have that approved and in the process of being done.
It is
Yeah.
definitely an expedited process. So
Yep.
it basically allows forest management plans to not follow that annual batching period, typically towards the end of August every year. That all of the other practices and applications are binned in and then ranked and prioritized, and funding is obligated. The Act now allows the forest management plans to be funded outside of that cyclic annual process. So yeah, they are faster. I can't speak to exactly how fast, and that depends on some other variables, but if you come in October, you don't have to wait until the next September to find out if you have a forest management plan. It'll go through Act Now. So that is an improvement for sure.
Yeah. Another program that they have going on is Climate Smart. And so that's kind of focusing on programs or activities that kind of help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, enhance carbon storage and sequestration, and improving climate change. So any activity that benefits the environment and helps mitigate climate change, which Sean can definitely elaborate on because he knows more than I do. So another thing to take into consideration is eligibility. So there's eligibility requirements for all of the programs, but also there's producer eligibility and then there's land eligibility. So one thing in particular is a CSP requirement is that all of the land that you own is eligible or is considered in that application. So that's just another funky little note. So for producers, you have to have a social security number or something that identifies you by the IRS, and you have to prove that you have control over the land that a practice will be applied to. So If you are an individual who doesn't own the land, but you have a lease on the land to operate and do management activities, you have to be able to prove that you have control of the land for the duration of a contract. So if you're leasing land, you need to prove that you are in control of it for that entire year that a 1-year contract will be in activation, or the 3 years, or the 5 years, or the 10 years. You have to prove that you make less than $900,000 and that you have not job approval authority, but authority to make decisions for management on the land. And then as far as land, that one's pretty simple and straightforward. Is it ag land? Is it crop, grassland, or non-industrial private forest land? Or is it kind of associated ag land? So like maybe you have a large swath of property and half of it is forested and then the other half is pasture. They would both be eligible. It has to be in compliance with erodible land and wetland conservation provisions, which I am not well versed on those, but every field office should be able to kind of check that for you. And then a farm track number, which is really important to get started with any of the NRCS applications. It's like step number 1, most important. You have to have financial or management control over that land, and then no marijuana growth, which makes sense since it's federal money. So it's pretty simple and straightforward in regard to getting involved with the NRCS. So like I had mentioned, a farm track number is important and it's a requirement. So this farm track number you get from the Farm Service Agency. This is step 1 in participating in NRCS programs like EQIP and CSP. So there's a Farm Service Agency located in every NRCS field office, and it's really easy to find out if a number already exists for your property. They'll just be able to look up either your deed or your property or your name or anything like that tied to the land, see if they already have it in the system. And then if they don't, you just have to fill out a couple pieces of paperwork to generate a track number. While that track number is being generated and paperwork is being filed, you can work with the local NRCS office to have your property kind of looked at. Like I mentioned earlier on, that technical assistance is free. You can get someone to come out, talk about some conservation issues that you might see on your land. Another great way to go about doing that is district foresters. If you're looking at forested land, are available for walk and talks where they can essentially walk with you on your property, help you identify and concretely determine some goals and objectives for your land if you don't already have those identified for yourself. After that, you can apply for various financial assistance programs. One funky thing about it is that it doesn't kind of run on like a typical calendar year. Like Sean had mentioned, there's batching periods and ranking periods and all these things. So, for example, one of the certain deadlines for programs, for instance, is forest management plans funded through Act Now. Those are funded on a first come, first served basis at each local field office until March 7th, 2025, or the funding runs out. So there's X amount of money set aside for forest management plans through Act Now. People can walk in and apply for those, and they will be approved, assuming they meet the minimum requirements until they either run out of money or they reach that date. And I believe a lot of the programs are like that. So these are just a couple of the available forestry practices. But you can kind of see there on the map, each county has an assigned local field office, and each office has a Farm Service Agency office located in the same building, like I mentioned. For a complete entire list of all of the available practices in Maine, these can be found on the online field office technical guide, which is basically all encompassing of all of the practices and things that would be available potentially. So each district also has local working group meetings, which I highly advise people to attend because that's where you can get your voice heard about how the funding is allocated for each district. So not every district has equal amount of funding for equal amount of projects. For example, I just attended the Augusta local working group meeting, and they were talking about fiscal year 2026. Last year, I believe the state of Maine, correct me if I'm wrong again, Sean, the state of Maine got roughly $3.5 million, which was divided among all of those field offices to then allocate towards different conservation issues in their districts. And you can see that some of these counties are grouped together in these districts. And so each district is going to have different funding pools at different percentages for the amount of money that they received out of that big pot. So Augusta was potentially looking at in 2026 having ag waste funding, taking 45% of the pot, forestry at 25% of the pot, crop at 25%, and then pasture at another 5%. So each area is going to be a little bit different in the way that they're funding and the amount that they're funding different projects because of the resource concerns in each area. So each area might have a heavier emphasis on crop and ag, like Aroostook County versus, say, York County and Cumberland County. So if you want to have a say on how the money is allocated and which projects should be funded and things like that, I would highly advise attending local working group meetings, which those meetings are published online on the NRCS website. And then Sean, I will let you go ahead and we'll get you started on your part.
All right, I'm unmuted. Can we see my screen?
Yep.
Not in presentation mode yet.
How about
There
that?
you go.
Alrighty. Oops. Well, thanks, Olivia. So I will talk a little bit more about climate smart. So add a little bit more to the acronym soup, if you will. If anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask as we're going through. So I'll just be talking a bit more about what is climate smart and the IRA funding and ways that has affected and what that looks like in the forestry realm, and then take a look at chat a bit more about CSP and some of the bundles like Olivia mentioned. So just some other another intro slide, which we don't need to go over because Olivia already had that. So going to Inflation Reduction Act, typically called IRA funding. So IRA started in 2023 and provided just shy of $20 billion in funds over 5 years to support climate change mitigation in NRCS, and this is federally, nationally. So in fiscal year 2025, to give you an idea, there's 2.4 billion that came through the Farm Bill and another 3 billion through Inflation Reduction Act. So Inflation Reduction Act, this money is coming through NRCS, and the one way it's coming in is through climate smart ag and forestry activities. So in the federal government's eyes, climate smart is something is considered climate smart if there are quantifiable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions or there is carbon sequestration and storage. So what that looks like in the forestry realm, as I'm sure you can imagine, if you're planting something or you're doing something to promote increased forest health and vigor, you are aiding sequestration and storage. That's something that good forestry and good silvicultural practices have been doing that forever. So 666, the forest stand improvement practice, which a lot of the forestry work that gets done in Maine gets done through that practice at NRCS. That is a climate smart practice. So these climate smart practices, they aren't new, at least in EQIP. The practices themselves are not new. These are practices that have been in NRCS's repertoire for a while. They've just been identified to also have climate smart benefits. So the 666 forest stand improvement practice is the same as it has been. It's just considered climate smart now for those reasons I mentioned before. So what this basically means is if a practice is considered climate smart with your local office, if you plan or are applying to do implementation, whether it be crop tree release, thinning, something of that nature, that practice, as I mentioned, is considered climate smart, so that application can not only go through the local funding pool and the regular federal slice of the pie that Maine NRCS gets, but also through IRA funding as well. So essentially, two tickets to ride, or like two opportunities to get picked through that priority ranking for funding. Because just because NRCS is a voluntary organization and there is the cost share and the financial and technical assistance. It is a priority ranking system. So just because you go in and want to work with NRCS doesn't mean that on any given year, other applications may priority rank higher and may not get chosen. So the fact that there's two funding pools just provides greater opportunity. And to put it in perspective on a state level, the first year that IRA funding was provided to Maine in 2023, Maine received around a million and a half with in IRA funds. In fiscal year 2024, Maine received just over 13 million or so dollars in IRA funding. So that kind of shows you the increase in the funds from the first year to the second year, and just in general, how that's a considerable amount of money. These IRA funds are not just for forestry practices, though. Climate smart and mitigation activities, there's a whole list. There's over 100 practices that have been identified. I don't know the exact number, but I'll go to another slide. So as you can see over here on the right, there are that's an example of the fiscal year 2025 Climate Smart Ag and Forestry mitigation activities list. So there are the practice codes, which NRCS uses. And as I mentioned, Forest Stand Improvement 666 is the number associated with that. The conservation practice, and then in addition, CSP enhancements. So enhancements from the base practice that are also considered climate smart. What's in yellow here are new things that are added for the year. So anything you see in that and highlighted activities have been added and updated in fiscal year 2025. So this list is available. You can either stop by your field office to chat about climate smart, reach out to myself or Jerry Barnes with regards to forestry specific questions. But yeah, you can see up here what I had already mentioned, that in the federal government's eyes, climate smart requires greenhouse gas emission mitigation and carbon sequestration and storage. So these climate smart activities, as I mentioned, they go across a number of different categories within NRCS, which includes forestry and wildlife habitat. And as I mentioned, forest stand improvement is one of the big ones that a lot of the forestry practices get enacted on, and it is also considered climate smart. So you can see kind of on a closer up screen here. This is a close-up example of the climate smart mitigation activity list for fiscal year 2025. And these new items in orange are things that have been added. Unfortunately, they don't tell you what things have been taken away, but that doesn't affect the 666 practice for this year. So the reason we're also looking at climate smart in the state, I just included some information that's available online. You can kind of see, as I'm sure we're aware, the climate is changing, and you can see that from projections that temperature is likely to increase. And I'm sure from this dry, hot fall we've had and beginning of winter so far, that definitely in this small window of looking at that time period definitely feels to be true, at least. But things are variable and swings around, but that's why we're considering climate smart. And then I wanted to just touch on a specific CSP bundle. So as Olivia mentioned, the two main programs that funding comes through is through EQIP and CSP. And CSP would like to consider, people that are going above and beyond and enhancing their already good conservation work. So with regards to forestry specific enhancements, there's a number of them. So as I mentioned, practices have a 3-number code. Enhancements have letters included, so just adding to the acronym here, but they include, for example, like E666A, which is a forestry enhancement, which is maintaining and improving forest soil quality. There's a whole host of them, well over a dozen: planting for high carbon sequestration rate, crop tree management for mass production, increase on-site carbon storage, reduction height of forest understory to limit wildfire risk. There's a number of different CSP enhancements that can be attached in a CSP contract with NRCS, which I don't know if I saw on the slide, Olivia, you had 5 to 10 years. I believe CSP is just a set 5-year program. But one of the things I wanted to mention that I think is really interesting for sugar makers, and I mentioned this at the, I talked about this at the National Maple Syrup Conference down in Portland this past year, but there's a sugar maple specific forestry bundle in CSP, but it includes 4 specific enhancements that you're required to implement in your forest management, focused on establishing and maintaining species diversity, maintaining or improving soil quality, enhancing understory vegetation, and crop tree management for mass production. So the focus of this enhancement in this bundle is really to promote species diversity in a healthy forest, because if folks have sat in on other sugar maples or climate resilient talks recently, there's a push for syrup producers to try and promote their sugar bush to have at a minimum 20 to 25% by basal area of different species, possibly other hard-mast species. So this bundle is kind of aimed at that, and there is specific technical assistance. This is an example of a specific technical assistance and financial assistance aimed at sugar bush management. And another kind of really interesting part of this is these bundles receive additional ranking points and a higher payment rate than doing some of the other CSP enhancements or a practice through CSP on its own. So some other kind of interesting incentives there as well. And in the same note, focusing a lot on maple, but these are just 2 examples in the forestry realm of how CSP can kind of go above and beyond. This is actually through a SEMA activity, so an agricultural energy assessment. You can think of it as an on-site audit. Energy audit can be conducted to recommend ways to be more efficient on the production side of your sugaring operation. So this can include practices like energy efficiency agricultural operations. So can think of oftentimes implemented recommendations can include adding a reverse osmosis system, evaporators, preheaters, things like that. So just 2 examples of specific programs aimed at forest management that are considered both climate smart and really, I think, useful technical assistance and financial assistance that are aimed at some important industries in our state. So definitely stop by your local office. You can see we now had 2 instances of this map up on the presentation, but you can expect to find, as I'm sure you're aware from working with the local offices, DCs, district conservationists, soil cons. They now have natural resource specialists working in the office too, which are similar to a soil conservationist, and partners like myself and Olivia, and other folks in the TSP realm or in the NRCS world include TSPs, which I know a number of you are, Farm Service Agency, rural development, and then our soil and water conservation districts. So kind of sped through some of that information, but if folks want to ask specific questions about CSP or EQIP, I can now see the chat here. Is there a minimum acreage? There is not a minimum acreage to work with NRCS. Like oftentimes people can think that there is, since the state and the Maine Forest Service has a minimum of 10 acres for their wrap plants, but there is not a minimum acreage to work with NRCS. in the forested setting, but that does play into the ranking and number of resource concerns. If you have a much smaller acreage, that can rank differently than a larger acreage with more resource concerns, more access roads, water courses in it, for example, as opposed to a couple acre woodlot. Not saying that those resource concerns aren't valid and important, but like I mentioned, it is a priority ranking system, and based off of that, that is something to consider as well. But the forest management plans, like Olivia mentioned, I haven't seen any instances of those not getting funded. So I always like to recommend, kind of regardless of acreage, if the landowner is interested, to either start with the RAP plan or come in and talk to NRCS about getting a forest management plan, because they really are valuable tools, whether it's just considering and trying to figure out and put down on paper what your objectives are as a landowner, or going all the way on the NRCS side of getting a full comprehensive inventory and seeing stand and stocking guides and recommendations from a licensed forester. So I just saw that first question, so I answered that. But yes, there are application deadlines. As I mentioned previously, the application deadlines, I believe, for 2025 is towards the end of August. It might be the 22nd or 23rd.
Yeah, August 22nd.
Okay,
I
22nd
just
this
looked it
year.
up.
It's typically around that time of year every year, towards the end of August, like I mentioned. But there is no bad time to come into NRCS. Typically in the spring, late winter, the offices are doing all of their ranking of the previous year's applications. So they might be a little bit busier, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad time to stop by and chat with the local field office. Someone will always be there. Or like I mentioned, if you have any questions, you can also call or email or reach out to someone like myself or Olivia, and we can either provide you with some information or point you in the direction of your field office if you aren't sure.
It looks like someone has invasive control program in addition to state program. Could you elaborate on that question?
Uh, invasives is a plant is a priority. It is a resource concern at NRCS for plant productivity and health. So there are practices for both for control and management of invasives, whether it's in your field with something like bed straw, black swallowwort, something like that, or our typical forested invasives as well.
I know we had in the local funding groups, we were talking about it in the local working group the other day. There were unique groups that were allowed funding, and some field offices I know had specific funding pools for invasive controls. In Augusta, at least, they are not doing that for the next fiscal year 2026. So then their specific funding pool for invasives is going to essentially be spread through their regular four funding pools
Yep,
effectively.
so that is a great point. Some counties will include funding, local funding set aside for things like invasive, because sometimes larger resource concerns like ag waste facilities can rank pretty high in the local funds. And if local funds aren't set aside for priorities that the county sees as important, then they may not get allocated as much. So mentioning that and working with with NRCS and the soil and water conservation districts and all the partners at these local working group meetings is a great way to voice that concern, so that some funds can be set aside for other priorities that are important on a county by county basis. So that's a great example of that.
15 acres is, I mean, I can't speak to how each office is going to prioritize and rank certain acreages on their during their ranking for applications. I don't know, Sean, if you know if 15 acres is going to be ranked compared to, it kind of depends on who else is applying and what the size of their operation is as well.
It is not just size based, it's resource concern based.
Yeah.
There's a whole kind of process in the background that the field offices do that go into that ranking process. So I wouldn't say that just based off of acreage is a reason to not go in to talk to the local field office. Kind of like district foresters, the field office folks will come out and walk the property with you, work with you, and look at the property to address resource concerns. So I wouldn't say that size of a property or your perceived kind of concerns are a reason that you shouldn't go in. They're a good reason to go in
Yeah.
if you think you have resource concerns, but I wouldn't say that something like that should preclude you from coming in to chat with your local office. Like I said, they're a great resource, and like district foresters, they will come out and work with you to get on the ground and walk around, whether it's from the field office or the state forester or someone like myself. To identify those resource concerns and figure that out with you.
Someone had asked about labor sources. So Sean had mentioned TSPs, and those are technical service providers who are certified to do certain projects and activities on behalf of NRCS. And online, there is a portal where you can find a TSP for just about any practice, and you can filter it based off of location. You could filter it based off of languages they speak, which is pretty neat. And that's a great way to kind of find someone who is qualified to do certain work and activities to NRCS standards, if that's something that you're looking for.
I see there's a question. NRCS paid for a forest management plan. Is there technical assistance funds to help implement some of the forest practices? So if anyone sat in on the TSP training that Jerry and Tony gave, I believe it was last week. There are some changes. I would definitely reach out to Tony Jenkins and Jerry Barnes to figure out in this specific case what that entails. But there is a transition, I believe, coming in terms of how technical funds are allocated in terms of what that avenue is, hopefully to the benefit of TSPs if anyone sat in on that training, and I believe it's recorded. But if you have specific questions about allocation of TA funds, then I would say please reach out to Jerry Barnes, Tony, or myself specifically, and we can look at that on a case-by-case basis, and they can talk more comprehensively about that change that is being enacted.
Looks like there's a couple people who are interested in pre-commercial thinning. Specifically,
Yes, Si, anything specific on?
Yeah.
I saw that you had a question on, not to single you out,
Jack had
or
one.
PCT work. Or anyone who's interested in PCT work, if there's anything specific.
So yeah, there's lots of PCT which ought to be done. And I'm just curious as to what the process for an individual landowner would be.
So first step would be to go into NRCS, because any forestry practice on forested land, you need a forest management plan first, an NRCS approved forest management plan. So that would be the first step in the process, is to go into the field office to get a forest management plan, and then start that conversation and working with your forester to get that plan completed and make sure if thinning and pre-commercial thinning or competition control or thinning for wildlife or what have you, any of those practices that would kind of fit your objectives and the resource concerns on the ground should be in the record of decisions on the plan. And then that's the next step in the process, to go back in the office and put in another application to do the design and implementation of those practices. So that would be on the NRCS side of things, what that would look like.
Does anyone else have any last minute burning questions that they need to get off their chest here while we're still on?
Yeah, can I?
You know, oh, go ahead.
There's been no conversation about storm damage. And where people fit, I'm, really new at this, so I really don't know what the heck's going on, but I've been apparently approved for some kind of storm damage, help, I guess. And could you talk to me about what is going on with that?
Sorry, I missed the middle part of the question, but it was about storm damage.
Yeah. Sean, you've been out at our place. I live in Acton, so.
Yep, I remember going out there with you, Richard.
Yep. So the question is, I'm really new at this. We've had cost share done before 3 or 4 years ago for a completely different reason, but now we got storm damage. And so I'm out here. Apparently I approved of it. I don't know what I've been approved for or how to do anything about it. The question is, how do you find somebody? I'm too old to be out there very long with a chainsaw anymore. So, I'm kind of just sitting here wondering what to do about it.
Yeah, so the program you're talking about specifically, EFRP, the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, and this is in relation to the December storms of last year. This was a program that was rolled out with Farm Service Agency. And in this particular case, NRCS was providing the technical assistance in the form of field assessments, which, as Richard mentioned, I went out and did at his woodlot in Acton. So that process goes through FSA. Unfortunately, with that program, I don't believe NRCS or FSA can point you in the direction of someone to do it. There is a list of technical service providers, like Olivia mentioned, and you mentioned you've done work in the past, so I know you said that you also had a forester for that work. So I would say that would be a good place to start. But with some of the storm damage, especially in some of the western areas, the damage was dispersed in the forest, as well as along access roads and things like that, but on a smaller scale, which can, from an economics wise, make it difficult to get someone out there to do the work. So if you're having difficulty with finding someone, I would definitely reach back out to Lori in your case, who is the FSA at FSA in Cumberland County, to see if there isn't something that they might be able to help with. That's kind of whether it's through that program or with NRCS in general. NRCS can't recommend anyone to do the work. That's why the TSP list is a great way to shop around and find a NRCS approved forester to do work in a typical forestry sense. In this particular case, that's what I would recommend, but I would say either reach back out to Lori, or you can give me a call separately and see if I can't help you as well, because I've heard similar cases as well. So not incredibly definitive answer, unfortunately, for you, Richard, but that's what I can provide right now.
Perfect. Thank you.
I see. After PCT is planned and approved, can we help introduce contractors and finding people to do work? So like we've talked about, TSPs are a great resource. Maine woodland owners, we have on our Maine webpage, a page dedicated to resources for landowners. You can also feel free to reach out and call our office, and we can get you in contact with some contractors or other people who can do work if you haven't been having any luck finding anybody to help out with that.
Yeah, it can be a little onerous and on the but it's almost like a little bit of homework, if you will. If you do get approved to do specific practices, in this hypothetical case, pre-commercial thinning, then NRCS, as I mentioned, has a list of approved of TSPs, foresters approved to write plans and then also do design and implementation of NRCS practices to the standards that are required by the federal government. So that is a great list. The state has a list of stewardship foresters, so you can compare those lists. You are required to use a TSP, but the stewardship list is the state's list of licensed foresters. That also includes, if you're interested specifically in, say, wildlife, there's a little chickadee next to some of the foresters who have taken specifically forestry for Maine birds training. So it's another great resource. to look at, to compare. And then I always like to say, you know, ask neighbors if you see a log truck nearby or a harvest nearby. Definitely shop around. Working with the forester really should be a um, long-term relationship, because you really want them to be a steward of your land and really paint those objectives on the land when you're working with them. So yeah, shopping around, asking around to find a TSP that's approved, that's right for you to do that work would be the way to go. And then also reaching out to folks like Olivia with Maine Woodland Owners, and other nonprofit groups like maybe Maine Tree, or the Forest Service, possibly. I don't know if they can recommend anyone, or other groups like that who locally might be able to provide you with some other folks to do the work. With regards to implementing the work and actually operators, typically foresters have folks that they work with, but that's not on NRCS to figure out. If it's small enough scale and you just want to do the thinning for fuel wood, for example, and it's on a small enough acreage, and it's something you can do, that's also allowed, as long as it's just to the contracted specifications. So there's no particular guidance there, but it's definitely something to talk about with NRCS as you're going through the process. Like I mentioned, it really should be a long back and forth process to make sure that you are doing, you're not setting yourself up or biting off more than you can chew with any one contract. So that definitely should be a part of the conversation if you're worried about someone to do the work. So.
I think we have time for one more question. The last one I see that we haven't gotten to. Do invasive plants need to be updated after a first pass of control?
So I think I can half answer or somewhat answer this question. So all of the practices, and this is again, sorry to sound like a broken record, going back to working with NRCS, but and being a part of that conversation, all of the practices have a lifespan. So competition control, or invasive management, those practices have a lifespan. So over the course of that practice's lifespan, you have to maintain that condition. So if it takes multiple management activities to do that, then that's part of the process. So while NRCS isn't a regulatory agency, if you are contracted to and sign a contract to do that work with NRCS, you do have to maintain that practice for the lifespan. So I think that someone answers the question. It, especially with invasives, invasives are a long-term relationship. So very rarely are they a one and done type of deal. So again, these are just things, if these are questions you have to talk about with the field office, to make sure that as you're going through the planning process, you are not biting off more than you realistically want to chew.
So that just about takes us up to time. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to come here, and thank you, Sean, for participating with us. We will be sending a follow-up email, so don't be afraid. If you think of another question, feel free to respond to that. We'll also attach some resources for you guys about some of the things that we talked about today. But again, thank you for coming, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.